Hey everyone. Um, this is Reading Rage Inc.'s A Reading Rage Live. I'm live and I'm alive! For the meantime, hopefully for a while, we'll see what's going on. And this is Hellish Poe. He's my noble sidekick, and that's Molly, my other noble sidekick. Hey, thanks for coming back. Sorry, I was trying to figure out a new setup. It didn't work, but I'm just gonna go a different route. So thanks for coming back on. I'm gonna wave, and this is actually a peach momotaro tea. It's a blooming tea. No Bigelow today. Sorry, not a Bigelow for Gigolo today, but we will be soon. Okay, and if they want to sponsor me, I can give them another shout out. Bigelow tea is what I've been drinking in the past few lives. That's right, Helly. We're Bigelows for Gigolo. That's true. This is going to be a short movie review about Godzilla Minus One. I know, we're a little late, but late enough that I'm not going to do any spoilers, right? So if you didn't see it in theaters, hopefully you saw it on whatever your streaming platforms are. Okay, Hulu, Gulu, Shulu, Netflix, Betflix, Stepflix? I don't know. Anyways, but if you didn't see it by now, hopefully I'm not going to give anything too crazy away, right? I'm just going to go over the highlights of what I liked about it, a couple things that I thought, that they addressed that I can understand why they addressed them, but I don't know if I liked it so much that they harped on them so many times, and I'll go into all of that. But I don't think I'm going to give any crazy spoilers away, so if you haven't seen it yet, don't worry, I'm not going to ruin it for you, okay? Thanks so much for joining. So I thought this was a really fantastic movie. I mean, if you didn't see Godzilla Minus One, I really loved it. As far as sci-fis go, if you watched it growing up, different Japanese versions, or if you saw the cartoon and you're already a fan, then you know why it's so awesome. It's just that timeless metaphor on that's that scary image, right? So it touches on the hardships of war, really, and the agony that veterans face when they're caught in this war machine and they're used like pawns, really. And that's kind of just a running theme caught throughout the whole movie. So we see really that Godzilla Minus One shows the destruction that comes from nuclear war, right? And you see that prevalent blue lightning like tail and gorgeous like fire that comes out of Godzilla's mouth. And so it's gorgeous because I think the cinematography or the CGI is just done really, really well, and it's just beautiful. I even I guess I'll go into Godzilla itself, or herself, right? Because I guess if you watch the cartoon, she has babies, and so I guess some reptiles are male and female and can have kids, so maybe maybe I shouldn't gender Godzilla, they. So they make Godzilla in this movie to look almost like the Japanese version from the old movies, that they're very like bumpy, scaly, just this image that looks like the timeless Godzilla image that I really enjoyed. And then I see just how they swim in the water, and you see that moment where they're swimming in the water, and it almost reminds you of Jurassic Park, the book. If you've ever read the book, how Dr. Grant, I believe, is the one that not Dr. Malcolm, but Dr. Grant, he in the book is with the kids, and they have to go into the aviary where all the pterodactyls are to escape from the Tyrannosaurus Rex. Well, the Tyrannosaurus Rex, he gets into this boat, and this isn't in the movie, this is only in the book. They get into this boat, and they're trying to get the raft. They're walking on the grass, and it's a teenage Tyrannosaurus Rex that's there. And they're like, and he's asleep and he's snoring or something. And he's like, if we can get into the water silently, and if we can get down the stream, we can escape the Tyrannosaurus Rex. Well, right when they get into the boat, the little girl, because in the book it's the little girl's the little tomboy, and her brother's a little bit older, but he's still a little kid, and he's still the genius. And so they get in the boat, and he's paddling, right? And he's like, okay, we can do this, we can escape. And then all of a sudden she's about to sneeze, and she's like, and he's like, and they're like, no, don't sneeze. And she's like, and then they're like, no, don't sneeze. And then she sneezes, or she coughs or something. And so that wakes up the Tyrannosaurus Rex. And he's so terrified, but he's also like a paleontologist and an archaeologist. And so he's like, this is this one moment that we all talk about as paleontologists. Like, can the Tyrannosaurus Rex, since there's so much like crocodiles, can they swim? And he's like, in the back of his head, he's like, this is that question that we all wondered, but like, I really don't want to know. At this point, as we're floating down the river trying to save our lives, and sure enough, of course, the Tyrannosaurus Rex can swim, and he gets in the water, and he has his snout just above the water, and then his tail is like an oar, and it's just like navigating him back and forth. And you see that with Godzilla and this idea of it's like a Tyrannosaurus Rex in the way it swims with its body. It's like crocodile-like body. Just beautiful the way they did the CGI, beautiful way they did the concept. They really studied how they wanted Godzilla to move, how they wanted the mouth to look, how they wanted the skin to look, to grow, and to just everything I thought was done really, really well. All these like little details were just done impeccably well. I mean, very, very well. So, we see that with Godzilla. Sorry, I'm a big Godzilla fan, if you can't tell. But it's a sad movie. And throughout the whole movie, I was actually incredibly, immensely sad. Despite all of the artwork, how well it was done. I mean, it's a very sad movie about war. And the destruction of nuclear weapons. And you keep thinking of the metaphor of Godzilla and how it viscerally, you can see it blowing up cities and how people are blown away. City blocks are destroyed, demolished, and the rubble and how all of that comes down and is just sometimes completely obliterated. And you think of Hiroshima, and you think of Nagasaki, and then you think of everything that's happening right now in the world. And that's all I could keep thinking about over and over and over, and how they show even how jobs were so scarce, how they had to walk through the city, and people were looting and pillaging and plundering because there were no jobs to be found. And the ones that finally got offered to this main character were jobs that were them in of itself suicide missions. And how war is like suicide a lot of times. And people do it because they feel like they have to defend their families, and that's the only option. Literally, when he goes and finds a job, his only option was, again, something to do with war, and it was a suicide mission. He had to go on a boat and try and go to the mines in the ocean that were left over and undetonate them, diffuse them. So that way, people could go fishing. So people in their boats wouldn't die when they hit a mine. And so just that idea of how hard it was to get food, how hard it was to get jobs and to provide for their family is just crazy important. And so that was something that you could see. People had to live in shanties because of the nuclear war, and because of the bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and other places in Japan, and how we can see how that correlates to today and the wars that people are going through, and how children have to live in those conditions where they can't find milk, or they can't find water, or they can't find food. And that was so visceral to see in this movie, and to get you to be more empathic, right? To people that, even though they don't have your political affiliation, you should still be empathetic to them. Empathetic. And so that's all very visceral when you see these cities blown away, and the aftermath of the rubble, and the jobs, and the food. And you think of the genocides that happened in the past and what's happening now, and how this is all juxtaposed in the form of Godzilla as this war machine, right? And it is a war machine because it's brought from the deep. Godzilla is brought from the deep of the ocean because of war. So it is itself a product of war. So you see this mirrored, right, and this analogy in Godzilla when we were watching Godzilla Minus One. And hey, thanks so much for being here, everyone that's here. And then, moreover, it poignantly addresses PTSD. And we see this main character and the night terrors that this veteran has, and the psychological trauma that's caused by war. And not just to the main character, that main character is one of many, and how that happens to even our vets that have come home, and how a lot of times they can't psychologically deal with that. I was able to work with Next Page Press briefly. They were a teacher of mine in one of my master's classes, and Laura Van Proyen has this crazy poem, and if you look in my my tagged videos for Reading Rage Inc., it's when I was working for Our Lady of the Lake University as a graduate assistant, and she has this crazy poem in her book, Francis of the Wider Field. And it's like, it's insane. And it talks about how she's going through trauma, and she meets a man who's going through trauma because he worked in a tank overseas, and the types of things that he did while he was away at war. And she says this all afterwards, but she says that she works with veterans, and she helps them with through poetry and art, because they have their own psychological damage and PTSD that they have to go through, and they have to cope with when they come back and they become regular citizens. And how do you become a regular citizen after being part of a war machine and seeing and witnessing all these things, right? And so so we see how much PTSD this young main character gets, and I'm sure you've had people in your lives potentially that have also gone through war, or maybe you haven't, but maybe they've told you stories, and you can see how it's damaged them. Some men cope with drinking and they can't stop, or other substance use problems. And I'll go into that later, but this also, Godzilla Minus One, also shows how people will, and let me emphasize, should help people despite political or personal opinions. And let me emphasize that again. I love this movie, Because even while people are angry with each other because their political and personal opinions are different than someone else's, they still help each other in the rubble and the ruins of war, because it's the right thing to do. Additionally, it shows that how citizens can band together in the face of an unreliable government. Governments that are making decisions, and it's like taxation without representation, you know? They're so far away, far removed from what citizens are actually going through, that citizens have to form unions and protest and find solutions to these bigger problems, to these Godzillas that are in our lives, to these monsters that are in our lives. And I thought that was really important, and that showed how citizens need to find healthy solutions and compromises to band together in the faces of unreliable governments. And another one is that warning systems. How warning systems failed because they didn't give, not because they didn't go off, but because they don't give people enough time to react in the face of catastrophe, or before catastrophe actually strikes and gets there. These warning systems gave people little to no time. And it makes me think of, obviously, like, one, how in Hiroshima and Nagasaki people were dropped leaflets telling people to get out. But it wasn't enough time. And how do people decide how to get all of their things out of there? I mean, you're leaving people with no time. What if they have elderly people that they have to care for? And like, Eastern countries are not like Western countries. They take care of their elderly. Like, obviously, like, Hispanics and Latinos, we take care of our elderly, right? And a lot of times they'll live in the house with us. And I know, like, with my grandparents, we had them at home, right? Taking care of them. A lot of my friends' families, they had their grandparents and they were taking care of them in the home. That's just one of those things that you do. You take care of the abuelos, right? And the grandparents. Well, Eastern countries are like that too, and Japanese are very much like that. They want to make sure that they're taking care of their elderly. So dropping leaflets is not going to do anything. If you have someone that's elderly, how are you going to get them out in time? And then they were bombed. And that's generational poverty that is just gone. I mean, generational poverty that occurs, like, their generational wealth is just gone. These whole communities. And so I thought that was really interesting, because in the Godzilla Minus One, their warning systems in 2 separate occasions completely failed to help them prepare for Godzilla's coming. And we see that even in our real life, like, places that are going on. We see that in Palestine that's going on right now. They're moving from city to city, and they're apparently dropping leaflets. It's not going to help them. They can't get their kids out in time, and even if they could, they're being murdered on a mass scale. Even the places that are said to be safe are not safe for them. So those were all the things that I thought were really, really important. And then I just wanted to touch on those bullet points, and then I'm going to go into a little bit more detail, but not very much. This part, I'm going to say there are a few things that I didn't like, but I thought that they were important, and as I think about it more, maybe it was food for thought that the director and the screenwriters brought, and it's still very important. So, you know, if you saw the movie, the main character kept blaming himself. He was a kamikaze fighter, which means he basically was supposed to be kind of like a suicide fighter, a suicide bomber, because they were just to go into a really rough situation, and more than likely they were never going to get out alive. And so these regular average citizens are given they sign up, they become soldiers, they're given these tasks, and he leaves his post, and he goes to get his airplane checked. Well, then he gets this same situation that he has to face twice in a row at the beginning of the movie. And it's like a mirror of the same situation, but it's again now with Godzilla. So he gets to this island, and he sees these eggs, right, from the deep. And that's the first signs that the environment is warning them, right? Something's happening because of all the war. Then the radar goes off and the sirens go off, but they don't have enough time to react. And then all of a sudden Godzilla's there on the shore, and everyone asks, all the scientists ask him, the kamikaze fighter, like, we need you to go to the plane and fire the gun at him. Well, the gun's tiny, and Godzilla, if you see them, they're huge. They're like I don't know, 5 to 10 stories high, very big, like very large. And he's looking at the gun, and he's like looking at the scientist, who's this higher ranking scientist, higher ranking government official in the military, who's telling him, no, you need to go. You need to sacrifice yourself. You need to crawl across the beach. You need to get into that plane, and you need to use that tiny gun to distract him. And so he ends up going, and he's underneath Godzilla, a tiny man in a tiny plane with a tiny gun. And he in his head, you could tell he's like, this is senseless. This is suicide. And so, I mean, in my head, I was like, Godzilla's vision's based on movement, Jurassic Park again, which is probably not true, but just like kind of wait it out, right? Well, one of the scientists gets so scared, he gives away everyone's position and he starts shooting. Well, that gets Godzilla's attention, and he ends up killing everyone in the trench. And this higher-ranking scientist who was the one that told him the directive to go to the plane to shoot Godzilla, ends up blaming him throughout the whole movie and telling him, it's your fault all those people died. It's your fault. And so I think that is such an important point on how generals and politicians just are so far removed from real life. They don't see what's actually happening out there with these soldiers at war, with the genocide that's happening, with the mass murder, with the bombs and the guns. I mean, sorry, that sounded like that song Zombie, but and I would break out into song, but I mean, like, with the bombs and the guns and the, you know, it's in your head, you know what I mean? But it's not in their head. They don't understand. And then they gaslight, and then they blame, you know, the soldiers on the ground because they weren't able to, you know, finish whatever objective that was going on. And they gaslight these men, these soldiers, into shame and give them psychological trauma, which happens to this main character throughout the entire movie. And so I just think that mirrors how officials, they dictate from a distance, and that they can't see the real problems at hand. And then that goes into the draft, and how soldiers were treated during the draft, and how people hated vets, and vets who stayed, vets who left their post, but they just didn't care about their well-being, and they became homeless. They didn't get enough benefits. I mean, and there's millions of people out there that don't fight, that don't go, but they're not held to the same standard, right? People that weren't drafted, you know? And so I just thought that was really interesting, and it really reminded me of that, and it struck a chord of how people will you know, not think about the psychological damage that becoming a soldier does to someone. Whether that's right or wrong, I wouldn't be a soldier. I don't know if I could follow the government's orders. I wouldn't sign up. If I was drafted, I wouldn't go. I'd say, hey, Canada, here I come. I always wanted to visit. Now's my time. I wouldn't do it. I mean, obviously, like, if it was, like, World War II again, and we were fighting, like, say, IDF, who's killing all of the people, but we're not. We're sponsoring them. But if we were fighting the IDF, who were committing genocide, then yeah, of course I would think about signing up. I have 2 cats and a dog, but yeah, I mean, it's different. They're committing genocide to the Palestinian people. Obviously, it's way different. I don't know if I could be a soldier. Obviously, I think I'm aging out already, obviously, because I'm an old lady, but it's different, you know? If we were fighting Nazis again, yeah, obviously, like, I would defend my family and I would defend my country. But yeah, it's just, I don't think I could ever be a soldier. But I also don't know if I can judge people, you know? I just feel like that's really, I don't know if I have that much hatred in me to, like, judge people. Especially when you know that the media is so, they're they don't have fact checkers and context checkers that they're not held accountable. You know what I mean? So, anyways, Godzilla Minus One. Another prevalent idea is that the government's not being truthful, right? And so they keep saying that, like, oh, they're the government, you know what I mean? Like, you know, the Japanese government, and I think that that's pretty analogous to a lot of governments, not just the Japanese government back then, but even the governments that we have here in the United States and in other countries, you know, just treating soldiers like they're pawns, treating citizens like we're pawns. And we feel like, well, who else is out there that's going to protect our families? So there are people that think they're going into it for noble reasons. Not everybody. Certain people are thinking that they have to go into it for noble reasons to protect their family, despite it being a suicide mission. And well, next, I mean, I'll go through the last part briefly, but Godzilla doesn't just represent bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima and the war machine. Obviously, that's a huge metaphor, right? But I found that Godzilla Minus One, another point that they were making is just the analogies to all of the natural occurrences that were happening, and how, you know, bombing underwater summoned these eggs that would float up to the surface, and Godzilla was in all her glory, or their glory, was being summoned up from the deep. And that could be like how our sea life in real life, how our sea life is trying to fight back, you know, like the orcas. When the yachts started getting into their territory, they were like, you know what? All these oil spills, all of this stuff, I could see it's from y'all's equipment. It's not from natural reefs, it's from you guys. So they're starting to fight back. Another point is, like, do you remember during COVID when the cruise ships had to stop operating and the whales and sea life started returning to territories that they hadn't been in I mean, like I think they said, like, in years, like maybe decades or so. They started coming back to their natural habitats, and the ocean started getting clearer and cleaner just because we stopped cruise ships for a while. For, like, what, a year and a half, 2 years? Just that little amount of time helped get the ocean to be alive again. I mean, not now anymore, but yeah, it was so important. And how nature in real life, in real time, is showing us how humans are causing these natural disasters, how humans are the ones that are causing the world's problems, and we don't stop. And then next, But like in Godzilla Minus One, if good citizens, regardless of their religion or political affiliation, and I'll say that again, regardless of your religion or political affiliation, band together to find solutions, save babies and future generations, perhaps there's hope left. Which lastly leads me to the importance of the children and the young people in the plot of the movie. How they were central to this movie in the plot. And how people, like adults, like I said, despite their what political side of the spectrum they're on, they agreed to protect and spare kids from the hardships of war and violence. At least in the Japanese side. They saw that they didn't agree in certain cases, or that they were angry at each other because of things that had happened during the war. But they knew that they had to band together to save future generations. And if our country, if our countries, not just our country, if our countries, wherever you're watching this from, can end warmongering, so that way we can get other countries' resources. If we can end sponsoring genocide, if we can find real solutions to gun reform, if we can arrest neo-Nazis and get the government to officially name them as terrorists, then we can leave our future generations with a better world. And it'd be a start. Anyways, I thought that Godzilla Minus One was a beautiful movie about sorrow and destruction and war, because it showed how people can band together to try and find solutions to end it. And if you saw the movie, please tell me what you think. Tell me what you thought of my review. Tell me what you thought of the movie. If you watched it as a kid, any of the past ones, tell me how you think it compared to the one that Godzilla Minus One. Tell me what you thought of the CGI. Tell me what you thought of, did you watch the cartoon growing up? How did you think Godzilla was represented? I mean, like, you let me know in the comments if you watch it. If you didn't watch it, go watch it. If you watched this, let me know what you thought. Give me a thumbs up or a whatever people do on this app. The heart emoji. Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And have a good day. This is a Reading Rage live, and I'm alive! Bye. Thanks.